up, everybody? Welcome to the Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing. My name is Dave, and I am joined here with my gracious co-host, Greg.
Hello,
Greg,
Dave.
what's up?
I feel like it's been a little while. I feel like a little rusty. How do you
Feel
feel?
rusty?
Yeah,
I
I'm gonna like
feel,
shake the cobwebs off a little bit.
yeah, I feel like I don't even know what we're doing.
What are we doing? Did we ever? Like a lot of
Yeah,
questions.
no
But
idea.
t and then hey, let's jump back in with like one of the most serious subjects you can kind of talk about. I mean, that's what we're doing.
Yeah, so we took a few weeks off. That was nice, I guess.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Deserved. It was kind of nice to not have to study for a week.
hmm
Um,
We
that
actually attempted to do this episode already in all like transparency, and it just did not work because of internet issues. So
yeah.
that's
Hopefully that
that was a
doesn't happen
bummer.
again.
Yeah, that was a bummer. So when we attempted to do this, we were having a bunch of internet issues and eventually decided to scrap it and then said, I guess this is just maybe a sign that maybe we need to take a break and
Blow off some
took,
steam.
took a few weeks off.
Even
And
the
now we're
computers are
revisiting
tired.
that same topic, which I'm not gonna lie, like you said, it's nice not to have to do homework. Um, this topic in particular was huge the last 3 weeks for me. So I feel like I was still researching and actually like doing in person implementation of stuff
So
despite
meaning
stopping.
in your work, this was huge. Like this was
This
something that
was
was happening a
huge
lot
the
in your
last
work.
few. Yeah, this topic and the more intense version of this topic were two huge things for me the last like 3 weeks. So
Okay. All right. So we're talking about NSSI here. We're talking about non-suicidal self-injury. And I think like what you're alluding to is you've been dealing with this, and also you've probably been dealing with some suicidal ideation, which,
yeah,
these don't necessarily go hand in hand. It doesn't have to be that way. But with apparently like well, of course there are cases where you're dealing with both, and that's a really scary thing. So Dave, what is NSSI?
yeah. So NSSI refers to intentional destruction of one's own body tissue without suicidal intent and for purposes not socially sanctioned. So there's some common examples here. We have cutting, burning, scratching, banging or hitting. And also, most people who self injure have used multiple methods.
So when you see this, Dave, how typically, I know I have something in my mind what I'm seeing most of the time when I think of non-suicidal self-injury. And to me, it's typically comes in the form of cutting.
Yeah,
Is that
that's probably the most reported version of it.
now? And in my so here's the thing about NSSI. This is something that you sort of touch on a little bit in school. But it's not something you can really get a grasp on until you see it in front of your face, because it becomes this thing where it's paradoxical. Like there's this sense of urgency to fix it. Like you have to fix this. You have to make this stop. But on some like in some ways, this is something that's a coping strategy for the person who's experiencing this. So um, it's scary, right? It's
Yeah,
scary. So it's if you are going to get rid of this as a coping strategy, which is ideally what you want to do, there has to be something in its place to fix it.
yeah.
So, like, let's talk about a few things that, might be in the person's mind being accomplished with this. Um,
Yeah. So the some of the first reasons that someone might engage in this kind of behavior, first of all, the physical pain diffuses the negative emotion. So if they're feeling significant distress, um, sadness, grief, whatever that it is, they might engage in cutting, for example, um, as a way of getting rid of that sadness because now you're channeling your attention to a different type of sensation.
so, like, in a way, you're saying that this it can be used to regulate your emotions. So it's like you're out of control. You can't really like you're very much in your head, and the thoughts are flowing, and you feel out of control. This physical pain can sort of ground you, right?
Well, the way you're making it sounds awesome. So we don't want to say it
Yeah.
in that
Well,
way.
that's
We
the
want to,
part of the problem though, right?
yeah. well, that's the idea. And yeah, you're right. But like that's also like, what we would call like one of those maladaptive coping skills. Like there's
Absolutely.
different ways to do this. And you don't have to, mutilate your body in order to accomplish that. Another thing is some people say it creates a sense of calm and relief. I mean, it's kind of that similar diffusing,
Mhm.
negative emotions. It's all, like you said, it's all about emotion regulation. The other big thing, and I think this is like one of the hugest reasons it's such a big problem, it's instant gratification,
Mhm.
instant relief. So if I feel bad and I engage in this behavior, I immediately feel differently,
So
right?
it's yeah, that's counterintuitive to most people. You think, "Oh, I do this, I hurt myself physically, but somehow it feels good." So it's like this ego syntonic thing. So when you think it would be easy from the outside in, or if this is something that you don't really understand, like how do you get someone to stop cutting yourself themselves? Like why? Like it seems like that would be like an easy thing to do, when in reality is this feels good for them, which is difficult. It's soothing an emotional pain in a sense.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, Dave, like it is instant relief. Like you have this turmoil in your brain, and then that turmoil in your brain is transferred to that pain in your thigh or wherever you're cutting yourself, and you've gotten some relief.
Yeah. And you have to remember that instant gratification is a very dangerous thing, and that can lead to a lot of issues with addiction. So you can get addicted to cutting or
Mhm.
self-injury the same as you can get addicted to video games, to gambling, to spending, to drugs. Anything that gives you some kind of like rush of like dopamine, a
Mhm.
dopamine hit, right? It gives you a rush. It's instant. That is going to feel good, and that's going to make you want to do it again. And then the bad thing is, if it's not already bad enough, you're going to need to do it more frequently
Yeah, so
because
that's
you're
that's
not, it's
the
like chasing that feeling. You're never going to get that feeling, that exact feeling again. So you're going to chase it harder and harder.
so yeah, like that's the insidious nature of addiction. Also, any kind of maladaptive, or even like thinking of OCD a little bit here. So your body feels good, like you said, like you cut yourself and now you have this dopamine rush because you've gotten some relief from the anxiety, from the pain, from whatever it is you're trying to escape. And your brain is saying, okay, so I like that dopamine. I like that little burst of feel good emotion. How did I get that? Oh yeah, I gave them all these awful thoughts in this emotional turmoil. And so your brain kind of keeps that on a loop, and you get the emotional turmoil, you cut yourself, you get relief from it, and your brain wants to remember, how did I get this relief? Oh yeah, the emotional turmoil. And then you're stuck. And
Yeah.
it's difficult, right?
Right. Yep. Um, Another reason is individuals describe it as a relief of pressure. So when they cut themselves, I get this like almost this mental image of like cutting yourself and like it like coming out, the
Mm.
pressure coming out of you. It's kind of a strange sensation. And if you haven't, like it's hard for me to completely wrap my head around what that feeling must be like. But that's a common thing that I hear.
Yeah, like almost like a release valve, right? Like
Mm.
just kind of giving a little release. Yeah, and you mentioned early on, like this isn't something this an important distinction here is it's not culturally sanctioned. So this isn't piercings, this isn't tattoos. This is something that's private, and it's outside of societal norms, right?
Yeah.
It's not really socially agreed upon as, I don't want to quote unquote normal or safe behavior. So another thing, something else that maybe that's going on here, and this is kind of off the wall, but this is my own thought, so don't blame it on anybody else. Is this recognition of inner pain by making it visible? So I almost want to it's hard to understand this a little bit, Dave, but like you want to you want people to understand that you're hurting inside really bad. And so you create external markers of the pain. But that's, and the interesting thing is it's like, are you doing that subconsciously or consciously? Because a lot of times this is hidden. I don't know. But when I really think about it, I think it really just boils down to And I can wrap my head around this. That transfer of emotional pain to physical pain. You know, like, if you're in your head and all you want is relief from that, you cut yourself, you're feeling something. You're feeling
Sure.
something, which is,
Yeah.
you're feeling something, and you're distracted from your emotions. You're distracted from the thoughts. You're distracted from whatever pain is holding you down.
Yeah. There's also, so I had mentioned earlier about people talking about like the release of pressure. There's also some people that describe how they feel pretty persistently as being numb.
Mhm.
This is a big thing with like individuals who have borderline personality disorder. They'll often talk about feeling numb, feeling empty, and reporting that like this makes me feel something. So that's another potential reason. Um, Another one could be punishment for some people who have excessive sense of guilt or self-loathing or negative emotions about themselves. They might engage in this as a way to punish themselves or to discipline themselves. And the last one I wanted to mention was people with disabilities might engage in NSSI for totally different reasons. So, for example, like self-injurious behavior, sibbing, that's really common within individuals with autism. So you might see that as a way of like expressing like excessive amounts of like external stimuli, um, that they can't communicate as well, but also individuals who maybe struggle with communication issues, who have like cognitive disabilities or things like that, might engage in self-injurious behavior as a way of like communication. Maybe something's wrong, maybe they don't feel well, maybe something hurts. Yeah, I've experienced that quite a bit in my work with people with disabilities, and it can be really hard to tease out the reason. So a lot of times we'll commonly start with medical before we go into some sort of like mental illness or something along those lines.
Yeah, what about, like, it's making me think of, historically speaking, like, purification. There's been practices, like, historically, like, with people like Opus Dei. Remember that? There's that little, maybe it was, like, in the Da Vinci Code or something like that, and it was, like,
Yeah, they whip
self-injury.
themselves in the backs and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Now, is that something that would fall into this category, or is this, because
So that's an interesting thing because I feels like that would be more of like a different type of thing because they're doing it to as part of like a ceremonial thing,
Mhm,
I guess would be the best way I would describe
right.
it, not something self-driven that they want to do, but I bet it gets addictive.
Oh, yeah, and I there is this, like, the purification thing of it. I wonder if that ever comes into play with people, with mental illness, where it's like, you've done something that you perceive is wrong, and you deserve to be punished, and so you punish yourself.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't seen that, but I wonder if that could happen. So, like you said, there's, like, the examples are, burning, cutting, embedding objects, and men will typically, if they are going to, you know, engage in this kind of behavior, it's gonna be, like, it's gonna look a little differently, right? They've,
Sure.
like, punching things and hurting themselves in that way.
Yeah.
Head banging, banging your head against the wall,
Yep.
um, that's, really intense stuff. So, Dave, why don't you get into some stats? Because that's fun. Everyone loves a
Yeah.
couple stats.
So it's most common with adolescents and young adults, as you'd probably imagine. Um,
High emotion.
Of course, of course. And also, in today's society, obviously the influences are an adult is influenced differently than an adolescent or a young adult. Like there's sources of things that are influencing them. And as we know, there was a significant issue with like how this was represented in social media and also how many people were talking about it on social media, which, even I have my own firsthand report of someone kind of talking to me about their self harm, and when I talked to them about what made them start trying that, they said I overheard someone talking about it
Right.
on social media, and it made me think it was interesting and decided to try it. Even if the source is kind of like trying to help people, it's still making it more, bringing more awareness to it, which is makes people, I think, curious sometimes. So it's kind of, it can be a double-edged sword when you're trying to bring awareness to certain things.
Right, yeah, like, if it hmm, that's tough that it's, like, if they see it as an option when maybe they wouldn't have before, which are gonna bring the
Exactly.
numbers way
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Because you got to
sad.
think, where would most people, learn about this or think? But like, I think what we're also finding is it's something that has happened for
Yeah.
a long time, and there are plenty of adults, and older adults in, this today's day and age that engage in this before they even knew it was a thing. And you hear
Right,
stories like that all
and
the time.
you bring up that, like, it's, mostly in adolescents and young adults, and that kinda makes a lot of sense where it's you haven't had that experience where, like, you get these elevated emotions, things happen that are so powerful that you think are so important, and at the time they are, but you don't have the insight of, like, okay, these emotions come and I felt so bad, and then they go too, right? So you feel like there's an urgency to kind of get rid of them right away instead of feeling them. You don't get that value. Like, I
That's
remember when
definitely a thing.
like
Yeah.
when I broke up, like, your first relationship. I remember when the first um time I was broken up with, that was a painful thing, and I probably was.
You've experienced a breakup?
Oh,
I thought you never had.
I know.
I thought you
Uh,
just were in one relationship your entire life.
well, no, thank you.
No, thank you. No, 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 no. Yeah, I mean, and that's a big thing. And I mean, we can all put ourselves in the shoes of an adolescent when it feels like, high school or middle school. You feel like it's the whole world, right? Nothing else matters aside from what's going on in that little bubble.
Yeah, the
And then when
pinball.
you're out of there, it's like, oh wow, there's this giant world. And actually none of those friendships probably you're going to translate to real friendships outside of that
Mhm.
environment. And none of those people I will probably ever see again. So there's like so many things that you start to realize and change. Um, but maturity plays a big part of it too, right?
Absolutely,
The
yeah.
way that you process, the way that you start to understand the world and how to manage your own emotions. Those are all such huge things that I think play a big piece into why it's less common, but still common. It still happens. So with
Also, I think it's like the emphasis, and look, adults, we're all kind of guilty of this, but the emphasis you put on your emotions as facts. It's like, oh, I feel this way, so you're kind of like look around to see why you feel that way.
yeah,
Your emotions are important, and it's important to check in with them, but it's also important to challenge them too. Like, why does it make sense for me to be this distraught? Does it make sense for me to be this upset? Like, can we sort of, what tamper down the emotions, kind of challenge them a little bit?
yeah.
It's tough to do when you're young.
Um, a very like obvious and not surprising stat, but just one I can say is also in both adolescents and adults, the rates of NSSI are highest among psychiatric populations. So
Mhm.
those would be people who are dealing with or report like characteristics associated with depression, anxiety, and other emotional dysregulations. So, and I mean, one would assume that would be the types of populations you would see. However, though, here's my big thing. A lot of this, though, is all based on if an individual actually reports it.
Mhm.
So that's a really alarming thing because, like, of course, it's going to be reported more with individuals who are within psychiatric care because they have more eyes on them. They have more supports of people talking to them. That does not mean that it is not happening outside those populations. You're just not always getting it reported, I think.
That could very well be the case, yeah. And with the populations in the mental health world, I think you see the most though is, and it does make sense. And if you kind of want to understand why more, I mean, you could always go back to our episode of borderline, but it's you're all when someone's self-injuring, isn't I mean, maybe it's just me. Do you start to sort of assess for borderline personality disorder?
I wouldn't say I would jump to that conclusion.
Not that you would
I,
jump to the conclusion, but you would start maybe.
I didn't mean to say jump to that conclusion. I
Yeah.
wouldn't say that I would necessarily go that train right away, um, because here's why. What we were saying earlier about the reasons people engage in it has a lot to do with it. So if someone was engaging in this self harm in a way that like was trying to draw relationships back to them that they felt like they were losing, or it felt very much like um what's the word? I don't want to say trying to be very sensitive to how I've worded this.
Mhm.
So if it's something that's like made known to the people around them, and it feels almost like a tool
Yep,
to
sure.
somehow repair the relationship or to maintain the relationship, then yes, I would start to look or even just explore, other characteristics of borderline. Because as we know from that episode of Borderline, what you will often see with people who have borderline personality, it's all about that push and pull of the relationship. And things like suicidal ideation or suicidal thoughts and self harm are often used as a method to draw the relationships in closer at times. So it's that person that might say, like, if you leave me, I'll hurt myself.
Mhm.
Or if they're feeling the relationship's unstable, they might show, even if it's inadvertently, show the marks on their arms to let that person know that they're struggling with that, versus a person who, it's been disclosed that they're self-harming, but they've been hiding it the whole time. That's not a form of like, communication if they're not intentionally showing it to people.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's also this term, like when thinking of borderline, though, like when these like impulsive, like outbursts, sort of angry
Sure.
outbursts, and you want to get back to yourself. Maybe the emotional regulation properties of NSSI sort of help with that. Also, like that real lack of sense of self, not really knowing who you are, and that's like you can imagine where that could kind of get you off on a tangent. And maybe that can kind of help pull you back too. I mean, it's yeah, I've seen it with borderline quite a bit, but I see what you're saying. Yeah, like it's certainly not limited to borderline.
Yeah, the type of, emotional dysregulation can happen in so many different things. So
Mm.
I guess my thing would be I just wouldn't jump to it immediately. um if it just seems to be an issue with emotional dysregulation. But like at that point, you probably would, if borderline is at play, there would probably be other signs
Oh
telling
yeah.
you as well, like the unstable relationships in general. But yeah, yeah. So the other thing to mention is a common assumption is that this happens more in women, but there are studies that have shown in the general population that there's almost equivalent rates of this occurrence between men and women. So
Yeah, it
it's
just looks
not,
different. It
it,
just
it
looks
looks
different.
different. It might be less reported. But yeah, it might, in men, it might look more like hitting, burning, punching
Yeah,
walls.
like how many times on, reality TV or in maybe in your own life have you seen like a male just kind of lose control and punch a wall, start hitting things, throwing things? I mean, that's a form of self-harm.
Yeah.
Punching a wall certainly is a form of self-harm.
Or intentionally doing it, but
Yeah,
and with women it is more likely to see, things like cutting, and I guess even like certain eating disorders could be considered a
sure.
form of self-harm, right?
Yeah,
The other thing though I want to mention, I know I just said that, but I this is anecdotal, there's no studies to prove this. I'm hearing more and more about men cutting as well though, or boys, I should say, because
yeah.
adolescents. So I am hearing that. I don't know if there's if that's just happens to be coincidence or if there is more of a trend. There is also a stat that says NSSI appears to be more common among people who report as non-heterosexual, for
Okay.
example, homosexual, bisexual, questioning, and among Caucasians than non-Caucasians, which I'm not sure the rationale for that. The first one I can kind of understand if you think about some of the challenges. I mean, in our coming out episode, we listed a whole bunch of challenges that individuals might be faced with that could lead to feelings of emotional dysregulation and things like that. Um, so
Well, I
yeah,
think the Caucasians first, other than non-Caucasians, I can kind of understand that a little bit, and I think it speaks to like culture and sort of a I see in other cultures sometimes more reverence for, I don't know, spirituality, strength. I do see that, right? And then maybe they have parents who are a little bit more strict, watchful. Maybe that's part of the culture too. And I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of as far as Caucasians versus non-Caucasians.
I think it is a there is some cultural things for sure
Sure.
that we probably don't even have the wherewithal right now to explore. But I think that you're right. It probably is more of that. So we have talked about some of the reasons.
Hmm.
There's a few more reasons that people engage that I guess we can dig into. Hopefully, this doesn't feel too redundant. But right off the bat, there was yeah, so we explored, the individuals who might self-injure as a form of like self-directed anger or self-punishment. But one more common thing is there people are more likely to engage if they report feeling dissatisfied with themselves.
Hmm.
So something with like low self-esteem and, just a lack of happiness with who they are. And that's the other thing that we were talking about, the difference with adolescents and adults is that exploring of identity. And you're constantly, feeling like you're comparing yourself to others around you when you're an adolescent.
Right. And I think there's no choice but to do that. And I think that is a part of development. I mean, even sort of it all depends on how you look at that. Like comparing yourself to others sort of keeps you in check a little bit. And I think so comparing yourself to others can kind of make you, depending on who you're surrounded by, like a better person in a way. But if you're comparing yourself to others and you're seeing how culturally now and in social media and other things, like people are using this as an escape from their pain, that a pain that everyone's gonna experience. I think, like, that's one of the many drawbacks of social media. It's like giving this, as an option to take away the pain. Almost like it sometimes feels like, and I could be way off base here, but with the teenagers that I talk to, like it's like trendy, or you find community with people by having a mental health issue.
Yeah.
Do you
I
find that to be true?
yeah, and I think that was like, do you remember Tumblr, like the
I
blog site?
No, I don't.
That was a big issue with Tumblr was like there was a lot of it's like it's a blog page. I mean, it still exists, but there was a lot of issues with people making blog pages for self-harm.
Hmm.
And it was gathering a bunch of other people that were kind of like, and now you got a community of people that are all connected through this really poor coping skill.
Yeah, and if they heal and they find, some relief, some adaptive relief, then they lose their community.
Yeah.
And that's so it's tough. It's tough to kind of like intervene in here. So
Let
there's a
me
lot
let me ask you
there's
a
a
question, Greg. When you
yeah,
were
sure.
when you were an adolescent, how did you feel about yourself?
Dave, first of all, we're talking a while ago. But I will say, no, look, I had a lot of self-doubt, and there were times that were really hard on yourself, and things like I'm even getting a pimple or something like that. You would almost be like, I would do anything not to have to go to school with this on my face. It's like end of times kind of
Yeah.
emotions for these little things,
Were
Like I
you
said, like
do you feel like you had more self-confidence than others?
I feel like I was middle of the road.
Okay.
I think that maybe actually maybe a little bit more. Like I've always been sort of a confident person.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
So is it for you, do you feel like it's hard to put yourself in the shoes of like an adolescent that maybe looks at themselves? Because I was thinking when I was listening to you talk about like comparing yourself to others, I think a lot of it has to do with like also your self view as you're
Mm,
doing it. So if you already don't like yourself and then you constantly are comparing yourself to others, never a good recipe, right? If you have
right.
a decent base of like self confidence, which, comes from a variety of things, I think some of it is a little bit of biological. Some of it is our support systems, how we've grown up, and the important figures in our lives and how they've built us up. But
Y
then there's also, friend groups that we've been in and things like that that kind of play a part of it. But like we can all kind of like remember those kids that went to school and you just knew they had zero self-esteem.
yeah, so you make an interesting point here, yes, because obviously 2 things have to be true at the same time there, because there's that great Teddy Roosevelt quote where he says, "Comparison is the thief of joy." So when you're comparing yourself to others, you're seeing things that you want that you don't have, or you're looking at what you want instead of what you have in your life that you could appreciate. But then also, do you have to compare yourself to others, or understand that you're going to be judged by others, and that's sort of a way to kind of mitigate harmful behaviors, right? It's almost evolutionary. So it's both. So when you're a teenager, it's tough because you're. I think there's too much emphasis on what people think. Um, and there could be almost like a benign, um, an emotionless look at, or less emotional view on looking at others, and and sort of like judging yourself or comparing yourself to them, but not be like, oh, yeah, they're different than me in this way, and I'm different than them in that way, and I kind of like that about myself. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like finding like what's good there instead of like just because they're different in this way doesn't mean they're better in any way.
Yeah.
Um, it's hard though. Being a teenager is hard.
Yeah.
Being
Yeah.
young adolescent is hard. It's so emotional. It's so hard.
Yep. Um,
So
there's
so
another interesting thing we didn't really talk about. So when you're brought up in a home where you don't get to talk about certain emotions, like sadness, hurt, or disappointment, there's some individuals who report that cutting becomes like an acceptable way to feel pain if they're told that like it's not okay to be sad or, you know, to be hurt by things.
that's
So
actually
this is,
fascinating. Yeah, that's
yeah,
actually
yeah.
really interesting.
I haven't come
Um,
across this too much, but it is an interesting concept.
it's an interesting thought, right? So yeah, like if I could see that you're not, if even growing up, we've talked about this before. Like if I was to cry in my household, my father may have a problem with that. But if I'm bleeding, maybe that's okay for me to kind of show that emotion.
Yeah,
So if it's like you have to let that emotion escape, like you have to kind of find a reason for it. That's interesting.
yeah, yeah.
Um, what do you think? Like, talk about some strategies, Dave?
Sure, sure. There's this is I mean, this is tough. This is probably where this week it's really weighing on me, this topic, because like um strategies are only as good as the person who's like the person's willingness to implement them.
Mhm.
So that's where you got to challenge, and especially in our roles where we're more of just a voice box that
Yeah.
like the person then leaves our care after their session and we have no real control over what they engage in. So I think that can be really challenging, and I'm feeling some of that challenge this week, especially. But things that we know are helpful.
But Dave, while you're saying that,
Yeah,
like, this though, um, in all the different ways we've kind of talked about how this manifests and the reasons why it manifests, what you're doing just by the sound of your voice and everything, it's like you're caring and you're listening. And as soon as that happens, as soon as this person comes somewhere where someone cares and they're listening, that's when the healing starts taking place. I mean, for
yeah,
real. So
yeah.
like
So
you don't need to put too much pressure on yourself. Like just care and try your best, and they'll I think the first step is kind of helping them understand that this is a maladaptive, like this isn't something we want to do. This isn't going to create hurting yourself on any level is going to be negative for your self-esteem. That just kind of goes hand in hand. So if you're hurting your body, and there's dangers in it too, and you already
oh yeah,
have, I know you already have experience with people who have gone through very dangerous scenarios because of infection or whatever else. So
yeah,
I mean, it's kind of like psychoeducation, but there's also like medical education, like real dangers of this.
yeah, absolutely. So things that we know are helpful: self-awareness, so knowing your emotions are temporary and knowing that you're able to handle them. I
Hmm.
think that's a big piece is people don't have the confidence at times to know that they can handle a tough emotion. Also, they forget that things are temporary because they feel like, oh, this is good, it's always going to be this way. You get into that train of thought that's just everything so feels so permanent. So reminding yourself or learning that things eventually will go away. That's a big one. And
And the only way you're gonna learn that is if you feel the emotion through without having some kind of, um, without cutting or
yeah.
doing some kind of coping strategy that's maladaptive, right? So you gotta feel the emotion to know that it's gonna pass.
And that's the other thing is you have to understand that getting through or getting overcoming something like this is really challenging and it's not a quick fix. It will feel uncomfortable. It will
Mhm,
probably feel even more uncomfortable than when you start the process. It will get more intense because now you're going to be denying yourself from that feeling that you're
mhm.
looking for, that you've been so used to. So that's something that I try to explain to people right off the bat, which can be really challenging for them to hear. I don't have a magic fix. Part of what I'm going to ask you to do is going to feel really uncomfortable. And most people that we work with don't like discomfort.
Right. But
Most of the things they do is to avoid discomfort.
it's that same old, like, Hippocrates quote, though, if you can't heal someone until they're willing to give up what made them sick, and I think that people start to think that this is, an antidote to their sickness, but the reality is you cannot be hurting yourself and then have good emotions, have good self-esteem. Like, you can't be harming your body and have good self-esteem at the same time. It just doesn't work that way,
Yeah.
and that's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that we know is having meaningful relationships is
Mhm.
helpful. So, if you feel lonely, if you're isolated, that's part of the problem. And trying to find ways to explore having relationships with others, being more social, even improving the relationships you have around you that maybe aren't so great, like if it's your parents or siblings, whoever, friends that you wish were closer. That's a big thing. So working on that stuff will be helpful. There's also an idea that you might grow out of this, so knowing that this isn't forever could be something helpful, as we talked about. But as you mature, as you get better skills to manage your emotions, you might not engage in this. I hear that from people pretty frequently that they previously engaged in self-harm. They previously cut, or when they were younger, they used to cut, and now their child does, or something like that. And now they're concerned because their child is. Um, Discover what the function of the behavior is because it's tailored to each individual. So this is something that I think is an interesting concept, but so freaking important. Why are you doing it? Like, what is it doing for you? What is it that you're getting out of it? And how
Mhm.
could you do that differently?
Right. And
And
so
the whole,
how could you do that differently?
yeah. So, I mean, there's many ways. Like you can try to find a less intrusive or a less unsafe way of going about it, like
Mhm.
writing on yourself with pen. The ice thing
I like the ice
is
thing
big.
'cause it kinda does hurt.
You want to tell them what the ice thing is?
Well, I mean, as far as I know, just, like, putting ice on your skin to the point of, like, sort of, like, pain in the same way, right? It does work almost identically, and
Or
it's almost like to me, I think of the icing as, like, nicotine gum to cigarettes. Like, you're not there yet, but,
yeah,
it's definitely better.
yeah, yeah. Some people will just take the ice in their hands and squeeze it. I've heard of people like dipping their face in a sink of really ice cold water, things like that.
Yeah, the dive
Um,
reflex, like, that's a great emotional regulation tool in any class. And also I've heard of, I don't know how you feel about, like, there's a couple of visualization ones that are sort of like, sometimes I don't know, but, like, writing a letter to your cutting where you do this, but it sort of separates the cutting from yourself, from your identity. It kinda takes it away from you. And also just, like, the visualizing of it, like, where you're, like, you visualize yourself as your skin and the the cutting instrument, and it's just this whole thing where it's separating away from you, and you're seeing, like, what's going on and how everything must feel, and, visualization can be kind of good. I don't know how much in this thing. I think for me, for my money, I think the finding out the function of the behavior, like what it's treating, like you're cutting yourself in service to what? You're cutting yourself in service to feel, you're cutting yourself in service to not feel, to get space from your thoughts, from your emotions. Like understanding this, people might not have the insight or might not have any other strategies that like you could say, oh, well, look, here's a different way that you can maybe approach this. And ice. I do like ice.
Yeah. Riding the wave,
Riding the wave.
surfing the urge. That is a big strategy that I try to push.
Mm,
But it is like basically asking someone to get ready to tolerate discomfort. And
right.
it's going to get more intense, which is why they call it surfing the urge or riding the wave or whatever, however we phrase it. So that idea is to, instead of doing the instant gratification, instead of engaging in the behavior, when you get that intense feeling, paying attention to it, reminding yourself of the thing we said earlier. You know that that this feeling is temporary, and
Mhm.
you know that you're strong enough to be able to handle whatever intense feeling you're going to feel. And what you're going to notice is that intensity will start to increase and increase and increase, and then eventually it will fade away. And
So
that whole time you are avoiding the harm behavior. Occupy your hands, hold on to something, squeeze onto something, allow the feeling to go through you, and eventually it will fade away. The next time it happens, you might notice that it still is pretty intense, but do the same approach. And over time, it will become less and less intense, and eventually might, hopefully, it should just fade away.
so that sounds very close to if you're treating like a pretty common treatment for OCD is exposure and response prevention. So like you get them to want to do that compulsion and you either delay, with OCD delaying it for, like a few seconds, you can kind of work with that for a little while. With this is a little bit more urgent, but you delay it or you feel that and then you notice that like even you're absolutely right where it's like it's gonna get so intense that you feel like that's gonna be the moment where you would cut. That's gonna be the moment where you would flick the like switch 45 times. That's gonna be the moment right there. So if you can get there and stay there, it's only gonna be intense for so long. Like, you can't stay in that level of intensity forever. Your body just can't it doesn't have the enough neurotransmitters to keep you at that high level of anxiety for too long. So you'll be there, but then you'll start to feel a little bit better.
Right.
And maybe there's ways to distract yourself. Maybe there's, like, all kinds of strategies you can do. So this is something that people, deal with, but this is also something that's very treatable, and it certainly doesn't need to, last forever.
I think the really important thing for anybody who's like treating someone who engages in NSSI, or if you have it yourself, don't assume that person can just stop.
Mhm.
They've been doing this as a coping tool for however long they've been doing it. Even if it's a short duration of time, this has become their new coping skill. They're going to need to replace it with a more effective method. Um, if you do expect them to go cold turkey, you're probably going to see someone who now feels a ton of pressure. It could cause a rift in the relationship, or they could just, if you're someone that's in a treatment position, it could avoid them coming back for treatment.
Yeah, and like in terms of family too, because of course your family is going to be like, "Hey, stop that, like that. You need to stop that right now," and not really understand that you're taking away someone's best coping strategies. It's like the same thing if like you're an alcoholic, you're like, "I'm just taking your alcohol away right now and not going to replace it with anything else." Like you're just high and dry. That's almost impossible,
Yeah.
So it's going to take a lot of support and it's going to take a lot of rethinking the way your relationship with the cutting or the self-injury. It's because you essentially you're gonna see someone with this most of the time because, their family or somebody in the relationship has a problem with this, right? It's not so much that they have a problem with it for the most part.
Yeah.
Unless maybe you're seeing maybe that's when you see more with borderline, right? They might tell you.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and right, like you said, I mean, what else can we say as far as like, you know, giving people some peace of mind with this?
Well, I guess the biggest thing I could say would be, I mean, this is not like a permanent illness. This is, as we mentioned, it's a coping tool that you picked up at one point in
Mhm.
time. And the real solution is trying to go backwards and try to figure out, why did you pick it up? What
Yeah.
was it trying to address? What needs to actually be fixed? It's like that thing that we're always trying to do, is trying to figure out the root of the problem. Don't just address the coping skill, also kind of delve into a little bit of like why that coping skill exists
Mhm.
and what's the function of that behavior, so we can work on replacing the function of that behavior with something that actually makes sense,
Yeah.
not just taking away that coping skill and replacing it with something that maybe doesn't actually satisfy whatever it was that was trying to help the person with.
I think that works for me, Dave.
Yeah. All right. So that is NSSI,
Mm,
non-suicidal self injury.
that's right.
Okay. Yeah.
And welcome back. I mean, we'll get back into the swing of this thing, right?
Yeah, it was a little rusty, I guess, but it's a tough one to come back to, man. That
Tough one to
was
come back to. It
heavy,
was.
heavy, heavy. I had an email I wanted to share,
Okay.
and I'm not big on us sharing the personal emails that we get, but the person kind of gave us permission at the end of this email, and it's, pretty personal that they want to share their story. So I'm not gonna withhold that. So I'll share it really quick. It's kind of a long email, so hang in there, but it's really nice. Um, the subject was, your podcast saved my life. A heartfelt thank you.
This is my first time hearing this.
What are you talking about?
I tried to find it. I tried to get it on it, but like it had to like there's these passwords and everything. But no, go ahead. I'm interested.
Greg
Obviously.
can't access our email. That's
Yeah,
a problem. Hi, Dave and Greg. I'm not going to say the person's name. They asked me at the end of this, or they asked us at the end of this, if you decide, if you read this note in any of your podcasts, please refer to me as anonymous person from India. So my name is anonymous person from India, and I am from India. I am in my late 20s. Last year, I faced a series of unfortunate events, including having to quit my job and dealing with financial troubles. I consulted a psychologist who misdiagnosed me with bipolar disorder and recommended immediate medication. After consulting a psychiatrist, I began taking the medications, which led to a nightmare of side effects and constant changes. I suffered from something called akathisia due to olanzapine, even though I was on it for just a week. I then found other people who were going through it. Akathisia is a pure evil and not much discussed. I was emotionally more unstable than ever. I decided to quit the medication after 4 months, and I figured I would handle things on my own. After a couple of months, one day while brushing my teeth, I was terrified by the thought of giving in to my intrusive thoughts. Interesting to kind of have this, read today.
Mhm.
I immediately consulted a different psychologist who, after a few sessions, informed me that I did not have bipolar disorder, but rather a complex PTSD due to childhood trauma and life circumstances. It's been 8 months now, and I have been undergoing regular therapy, specifically EMDR, which has significantly improved my life. My anxiety, stress, and intrusive thoughts, once at an all time high, are now rarely present. So, where do you fit in? Back in October, I stumbled upon your podcast on Spotify, and I'm very happy with how excellently you explain things, discuss topics, and keep each other in check during disagreements. Your genuine efforts are the reason I am alive today, and gave psychologists a second chance to turn my life around. Thank you so much, Dave and Greg. Your podcast has been a lifeline for me. They would go on to explain that they're moving to Germany for their masters. So that's amazing to hear, and I really hope that that goes well. And they also say that in a country like India, mental health there is very taboo. So she was able to feel supported even though we were oceans apart, which is
Ah,
amazing to
dude,
hear.
that's so awesome.
That literally was one of the best moments reading that email.
Here's the thing with that email too, Dave, and like this is for you and I. Um, no matter what happens, numbers wise, whatever happens, it's like that happened to this anonymous from India, and that is good enough reason for the work that we put into this.
This things like this are not measurable.
Mm.
There's no way to like say how much this is worth monetarily or
Yeah.
anything like that. It's just this is the thing that I don't even think we fathomed would
And
be
that
able to
honestly,
happen.
if that's the truth, and which I there's no reason to believe it's not, then that's worth a life's worth of work, really.
Now,
You could
the
see
only
with it.
reason why I questioned if this was true or not is this last piece right here.
Oh boy.
So, P.S. Ever since then, I've listened to all your episodes and now I'm a regular listener. Your nice, crisp, friendly voices gave me a lot of hope. And of course, your amazing content is invaluable. I just thought because they said that about our voices that maybe
Well,
maybe
it's a
it's like the
different
exact
culture, it's a different
opposite.
country.
No,
Your
it's the exact
nasally
opposite.
voices.
Oh, yeah, we're always talking about how much we can't stand to hear our own voices, but no, honestly, that email really like it was so interesting because it was the the day after we attempted to do this episode and we couldn't do it. And I think the next day I was feeling a little defeated because I really did not want to miss a week. Right.
Mm,
And we decided, all right, we'll have to just roll with re-releasing an episode. And I was having an internal conflict about that because I was like, damn, we're going to lose all of our momentum and all this stuff. And it's like, are we, what are we even going to do going forward? I don't know. It was like,
mm.
it felt very monumental, even though it was like a really small thing. And clearly it was very small because 3 weeks here we are doing it again. But then that email came in and I was like, oh, this is why we're doing it.
Well, and plus it's already that so to me, it's already a success, so, like, whatever we do after that is just
Yeah.
bonus.
And I don't want to ignore that there are other emails that we've received like this. So there's been a plethora of amazing stories shared with us and just people reporting how they've connected with this content or how it's helped them with their studies or something they're going through, whatever. So
Much
really
appreciated.
really amazing stuff. Yeah, thank you. um Greg,
Yep.
what should we tell people?
I don't know, is there something to tell them? Oh,
Yeah.
like and subscribe, please. Oh, wait, not subscribe, right?
Yeah, like and subscribe. So
Okay.
we're going to be posting this on YouTube. Um, this will be our first video episode. So Greg, you're on video.
I know, and it's I know, I forget.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so yeah, we'll see how this goes, but we've heard a ton of people kind of telling us, I wish there was video content. I don't know if this is any better seeing our faces. I don't know if that makes this like actually it's probably ruining it.
Yeah,
There's a
yep,
ton of people have no idea what we look like, and now they're
I
like, "Oh
know.
my God, look at
Well,
those men, they're hideous."
I hope
So
not.
we'll see.
We'll see, give us at least let us know, even if we're hideous, a comment's a comment, take it.
Yeah. So this will probably release the video version will probably release a couple of days after the audio, just because it's a lot of work to get all this settled out. But yeah, YouTube, we're up on there, all the other platforms. Please leave us a rating and review wherever you can. It's greatly appreciated and helps spread the word and make this more accessible. But clearly, it's pretty accessible if we're reaching India and other places. So that's pretty amazing.
Mhm.
And we'll be back next week with a new episode. So we will see you then. I think next week, if Greg's done his homework, we might be doing a very interesting. Well, we have to talk about it. Hopefully, I'm not wrong. We might be doing a really interesting topic that's very popular right now in the children's world, in pop culture. I'll
Hmm.
just leave it at that. But
Ah,
we'll
yes.
see. We'll see.
We'll see.
So everyone have a great night. We love you. We care about you so much. Greg can't even make eye contact with you right now.
I'm sorry.
He's
I'm
reflecting
trying to think of
he's
I was
reflecting
trying
on
to
his
think
life. Yeah, that's what he's doing. He's thinking. He's looking down thinking. All right,
yeah.
everybody, have a great night. We'll see you later.